They wiped out a human colony. Earth's revenge consumed an entire star system. The smoke was already gone by the time I got the message. That is the part that stayed with me the longest. Not the numbers, not the names on the list, not even the footage that came through scrambled and broken on my screen. It was the fact that by the time I sat down at my desk on the transit station orbiting Kepler's reach, the smoke from 140,000 lives had already thinned into the cold vacuum of space and disappeared. My name is Mara Solis. I was a schoolteacher on Kepler's reach for 11 years. And I am recording this because someone has to. Kepler's reach was not a military outpost. It was not a weapons facility or a government installation. It was a home. It was a colony that humanity had spent 17 years building from a frozen, windswept rock into something that looked, smelled, and felt like a place where people could live and grow old and love each other. We had parks. We had a market square where farmers sold copper-colored wheat every Saturday morning. We had a little theater that seated 300 people, where children performed plays so badly that the parents laughed and cried at the same time. We had 2 moons. They rose together in the evenings and I used to sit on my back porch and watch them climb the sky while my neighbor Leon played guitar 2 houses down. You could always hear him through the thin walls. He was not a very good guitarist. But he played every evening without fail, and after a while the sound of his playing became part of the air itself, part of what Kepler's reach was. I want you to understand what was there before I tell you what happened to it. Because the people who did this, the Vakari Dominion, they issued a statement afterward. A very clean, very short statement. It said the colony had occupied contested expansion space and that the matter was concluded. It did not use the word people. It did not use the word children. It referred to our settlement as an installation. It referred to the end of 140,000 human lives as a conclusion. I read that statement 17 times. I was off colony when it happened. My daughter Nina was 7 years old, and she had been staying with my sister on Transit Station 4 for a routine medical checkup. I had gone with her. We were supposed to return to Kepler's reach in 48 hours. We never went back. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. The colony's public channel went quiet at 0340 station time. I was asleep. The automated alert woke me at 0347, flagging a communication blackout. I sat up in bed in the small cabin and looked at the alert on my wrist screen and told myself it was a technical fault. A transmitter problem. A solar interference event. I got up and made tea and sat by the small porthole and watched the stars and told myself it was nothing. The distress fragment came through at 0412. It was 9 seconds long. It was not from the colony governor. It was not from the emergency services or the defense coordinator. It was from a woman named Claire. I did not know her. Her voice was very steady. She said the Vakari ships had appeared without any warning or any communication. She said they were not responding to any signal. She said she could see light coming through the sky that was not sunlight. She said she loved her family. Then the fragment ended. I sat very still for a very long time. Then I went to my daughter's room and I sat on the edge of her bed and I watched her sleep. She was breathing slowly, the way children breathe when they feel completely safe. Her hair was fanned out on the pillow. She had kicked her blanket off in the night and her feet were sticking out and I pulled the blanket back over her without waking her. I thought about Leon and his guitar. I thought about the wheat fields and the Saturday market. I thought about the theater where last spring my class had performed a very terrible play about the founding of the colony and every parent in the audience had stood up at the end, not because the play was good but because their children were in it. I thought about Claire, who I did not know, whose last recorded words were that she loved her family. There was a notification on my screen from the United Earth Navigation Authority. It said all civilian vessels in the Kepler sector were advised to hold position pending emergency assessment. It used very careful, very neutral language. It did not say what had happened. It did not need to. I understood, sitting in that narrow cabin with the stars outside and my daughter breathing softly behind me, that Kepler's reach was gone. Not damaged. Not evacuated. Not in crisis. Gone. 140,000 people. 17 years of terraforming. The copper wheat. Leon's guitar. Claire's 9-second fragment. The market square. the theater that seated 300 people. The two moons rising together in the evening sky. Gone. I am a schoolteacher. I taught reading and history and science to children between the ages of 6 and 12 for 11 years. I am not a military analyst. I am not a politician or a diplomat or a strategist. I have no power and no authority and no weapons. But I have a voice. And I am using it to say this, clearly and simply, so that anyone who ever hears this recording understands exactly what was lost and exactly what was done. The Vakari Dominion chose a quiet colony on the edge of explored space. They chose a place full of teachers and farmers and children and neighbors who played guitar badly in the evenings. They chose it because they thought it was small and soft and far away from anyone who would make them pay for it. They were wrong about that last part. I did not know that yet, sitting in the dark of that cabin. I did not know what was already being set in motion. I did not know what word had already been transmitted from the nearest United Earth naval vessel, a word so serious that it had its own emergency code, a word that had never been used before in the history of human spaceflight. I did not know any of that. All I knew was that my daughter was asleep in the next room, that 140,000 people were gone, and that the stars outside the porthole looked exactly the same as they always had, cold and distant and indifferent, as if nothing at all had changed. I closed my eyes. I whispered Claire's name, even though I had never met her, because someone had to. Then I started recording. The word that went out that night was Lazarus. Commander Yusuf Adebayo was on the bridge of the ISV Unconquered Sun when the distress fragment came through. He had been awake for 19 hours already, running a routine patrol sweep through the outer Kepler sector, when his communications officer turned from her station and said, "Sir, you need to hear this." He heard it. He listened to Claire's 9-second voice fragment 3 times. He did not ask anyone to replay it. He replayed it himself, twice more, with his hand on the console and his eyes on the display showing the Kepler's reach position marker, which had already gone dark. Then he said, "Get me a full sensor reading on the colony site." The reading came back in 40 seconds. Yusuf had been in the United Earth Navy for 22 years. He had seen debris fields. He had seen damaged installations. He had responded to 2 previous colonial emergencies, both involving accidents, both with survivors. He thought he knew what bad news looked like on a sensor display. He was not prepared for what he saw. Kepler's reach was not damaged. The Vakari had not struck the colony's power systems or its communications array or its defense installations. They had struck everything. Systematically, layer by layer, from the orbital platforms down to the surface itself. The sensor reading showed a debris field where a living colony had been 13 minutes earlier. It showed residual heat signatures from weapons he did not recognize. It showed, in the outer edges of the reading, a scatter pattern of metallic fragments that his system identified as Kepler's Reach's civilian orbital ring. They had destroyed it on the way out. Just to make sure no one could land. Yusuf stood at his console for 11 seconds without speaking. His navigator, a young lieutenant named Gwen, looked at him. His weapons officer, a man named Derek who had a daughter back on Earth, looked at him. Nobody spoke. The bridge was so quiet that Yusuf could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the overhead ducts. Then Yusuf said, "What is our current distance to the Kepler site?" 19.4 light hours, sir, Gwen said. At maximum transit we arrive in 18 hours and 50 minutes. Yusuf nodded. He turned to his communications officer. "Send the Lazarus code," he said. She looked at him. Everyone on the bridge looked at him. The Lazarus code was not something any of them had ever expected to use. It was a quantum burst transmission reserved for events of the highest possible severity. A Lazarus transmission bypassed every standard communication relay and arrived simultaneously at United Earth Command on Earth, at all active naval command vessels, and at the office of the United Earth Secretary General. It meant, in the bluntest possible terms, that something had happened which could not be undone and which required an immediate response at the highest level. It had never been sent before. The communications officer sent it. Yusuf then opened the ship-wide channel. His crew heard his voice through every speaker on every deck of the ISV Unconquered Sun. He said, "This is the commander. Kepler's reach has been destroyed by Vakari forces. 140,000 people. No survivors have been detected. We are the closest vessel. We are proceeding to the site. I want every department at full readiness. I want this ship ready for anything. That is all. He closed the channel. He thought about what anything meant. He had said it without thinking, the word sliding out automatically, and now it sat in the air of the bridge and nobody moved for a moment because everyone understood that anything covered a very wide and very serious range of possibilities. Then Gwen set the course. Derek ran his weapons check without being asked. The rest of the crew returned to their stations. Yusuf walked to the forward viewport. Outside, the stars hung in their familiar positions, unchanged, unhurried. The Kepler sector was quiet. There were no Vakari ships visible on any display. They had come, done what they had come to do, and gone. Clean and fast and without explanation. The Vakari diplomatic drone arrived 4 hours later. It was a small automated probe, the kind the Vakari used for formal interstellar communication. It matched velocity with the unconquered sun and transmitted its message on a standard diplomatic channel. The message was already translated into English. It was very brief. It stated that the Kepler colonial installation had occupied contested expansion space as designated by the Vakari Dominion's third expansion charter. It stated that the action taken had been a lawful exercise of territorial enforcement. It stated that the Vakari Dominion considered the matter concluded and hoped that humanity would understand the importance of respecting established territorial designations going forward. It was signed by someone with the title of Deputy Expansion Secretary. A Deputy Expansion Secretary. Not a military commander. Not a head of state. Not even a senior diplomat. A Deputy Expansion Secretary had signed the document that explained the end of 140,000 human lives. Yusuf read the message once. Then he drafted a response. It was very short. He read it over twice and changed nothing. Then he transmitted it on every open frequency in the sector, not just the diplomatic channel, so that any Vakari vessel or monitoring station within range would receive it. It said, "No, it has not." He did not add anything to that. He did not need to. The unconquered sun arrived at the Keplers reached debris field 18 hours and 44 minutes later. They came out of transit and the site opened up on every screen and viewport on the bridge and there was, again, that deep and thorough silence. Yusuf had seen the sensor readings. He had prepared himself. But there is a difference between a reading on a screen and the thing itself. The debris field was enormous. It caught the light of the Kepler star and scattered it in 1,000 directions. Fragments of what had been the colony's surface installations tumbled slowly in the void. A piece of something that might have been a building's exterior wall drifted past the viewport, still recognizable as a constructed thing, flat on one side and broken on the other. Derek was crying. He was not making any sound. The tears were moving down his face and he was not wiping them away and his hands were still on his station doing his job because Derek was a professional and he did not stop doing his job even when he was crying. Yusuf looked at him and said nothing. There was nothing to say that would help. He let Derek cry and he watched the debris field and he thought about the response that Earth was already composing. Because Earth was composing a response. He knew that. The Lazarus code had gone out. The machinery had started turning. And he had worked in that machinery long enough to understand something that the Vakari apparently did not. Humanity was difficult to anger. That was genuinely true. In 2 centuries of spaceflight and 40 years of contact with other civilizations, humans had shown remarkable patience. They had been cheated in trade negotiations and had renegotiated calmly. They had been disrespected in diplomatic settings and had returned to the table anyway. They had been pushed at borders and had held their position without escalating. They were slow to anger. But there was a difference between patience and the absence of limits. Yusuf had been in the Navy long enough to know what lived on the other side of those limits. He had read the classified histories. He knew what projects had been quietly funded and quietly developed over the decades, not because anyone expected to use them, but because humanity had a very specific philosophy about preparation. The philosophy was simple. You hope you never need it. And you make absolutely certain that if you do, no one doubts you for a moment. The Vakari had just found out where the limits were. They did not know that yet. They would. He stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the debris field turn slowly in the light of an alien star. He thought about 140,000 people. He did not try to imagine each one of them. That was impossible. Instead, he thought about a single morning. A Saturday morning. A market square. People buying food and talking and arguing about prices. Children running between the stalls. The smell of freshly baked bread or whatever bread smelled like on Kepler's Reach, which he had never visited. A normal morning in a normal place that no longer existed. He thought about the word concluded. Then he turned from the viewport and went back to his station, because there was work to do. My name is Orvin. I hold the rank of Fleet Scholar within the Vakari Dominion Military Intelligence Division, which means I am the person whose job it is to understand what our enemies are doing before they do it. I am writing this report because no one listened to the last one. I submitted my initial assessment of human response probability 11 days after the Kepler's Reach action. The High Council reviewed it. Senior Fleet Commander Gorith dismissed it as overcautious. Expansion Minister Velen called it an embarrassment. 3 council members laughed. I want it on record that they laughed. This is my second report, submitted 28 days after the Kepler's Reach action. I will try to be as clear as possible. I have spent my career studying humanity. I have read their history, their military records, their public communications, their cultural literature. I understand how they think in ways that most of my colleagues do not, because most of my colleagues have not bothered. The Vakari Standard Analysis of Humanity tends to categorize them as aggressive but disorganized, capable but divided, dangerous but predictable. Every word of that assessment is wrong. Let me describe what I have observed in the 28 days since the Kepler's Reach action. On day 1, the Human United Earth Naval Command elevated to Condition Bravo across all sectors. This is their second highest readiness level. Every active naval vessel in service was recalled from patrol and reassigned to strategic positions. This happened in 11 hours. 11 hours to reposition hundreds of vessels across multiple star systems. I want you to think about the logistics of that. Think about the coordination it required. We have run drills for a similar redeployment within our own Dominion territory. Our fastest time is 6 days. 11 hours. On day 3, all civilian human shipping in every sector adjacent to Vakari space disappeared. Not reduced. Disappeared. Every commercial vessel, every freight carrier, every passenger transport that had been operating on routes near Vakari territory simply stopped. They did not announce it. They did not file new routing plans. They simply ceased to appear on any sensor or tracking system within range of Vakari monitoring stations. I want to explain why this is frightening. It is frightening because we could not see them anymore. We did not know where they were. We did not know where they were going. They pulled an entire layer of observable civilian activity out of our sensor range in 72 hours and left us looking at empty space where there had previously been hundreds of trackable vessels. They went quiet and invisible, and that silence was not comforting. That silence felt like something holding its breath. On day 9, the Solis Compact was formed. This is the part one need you to read very carefully. Humanity has had political disagreements among its member nations since before it achieved spaceflight. This is widely known and widely cited as evidence of their disorganization. What is less widely understood is the pattern of what happens to those disagreements under certain conditions. On the day the Solis Compact was announced, there were 14 active political disputes between human member nations. 3 of those disputes involved competing territorial claims. 2 involved trade conflicts severe enough that human analysts had described them publicly as near-crisis situations. All 14 disputes were suspended simultaneously on day 9. Not resolved. Suspended. With a single unified statement that read, in part, that the United Earth member nations were placing all outstanding disputes in temporary abeyance for the duration of the current emergency. The Solis Compact unified human military command under a single structure in 9 days. 9 days to do what our models predicted would take them between 2 and 4 years under any realistic political scenario. I do not know how to express adequately how significant this is. I have been studying humanity for 30 years. I have never seen this before. And I want to be direct, I believe we caused it. I believe that what we did at Kepler's Reach was not a demonstration of strength. I believe it was a demonstration of the exact kind that strips away everything small and disagreeable between human factions and leaves only the large and unified thing underneath. We showed them the outside. And when humans see the outside clearly enough, they stop looking at each other entirely. On day 17, new sensor signatures began appearing in deep space. They are ships. I am confident of that. The drive signatures are recognizable as human in their basic characteristics. But the scale of those signatures is unlike anything in our records. These are not carriers. They are not destroyers or cruisers or any vessel class we have catalogued. Our best analysis suggests they are extremely large and that they are equipped with drive systems that have never been used in any previously observed human military operation. Where did they come from? This is the question that has kept me awake for 11 nights. My answer is that they have always existed. I believe these vessels represent a program that humanity has been developing quietly, without announcement, for a period of not less than 30 years. I believe they were built, maintained, and kept in reserve specifically for a scenario like the current one. I believe, in other words, that humanity looked at the possibility of extreme provocation by another civilization, decided to prepare for it, and then never mentioned the preparation to anyone. They built the response before the reason existed. I cannot tell you how many of these vessels there are. Our sensors have identified 23 distinct signatures. I do not believe we are detecting all of them. I do not believe we are detecting most of them. I want to be very direct about my recommendation. The High Council should open immediate diplomatic communication with United Earth Command. It should do so with full acknowledgement of what occurred at Kepler's reach. It should offer reparations at whatever level humanity specifies. It should withdraw all expansion designations in the Kepler sector and the surrounding regions. It should do all of this immediately, without condition, and without any attempt to negotiate from a position of pride. I say this not because I believe it will return things to where they were before. Things cannot return to where they were. I say it because I believe it is the only action that gives us any meaningful chance of a controlled outcome. The Council will ask me what I think happens if we do not act immediately. They will ask me what I think these ships are capable of. They will remind me that we outnumber humanity in active vessels by a ratio of 4 to 1 and that our Dominion territory spans a larger volume of space than any human-controlled region. I will tell them what I have not told them before, because I did not have enough data to support it until now. I believe that humanity has developed a weapon capable of engaging a stellar body. I will not write the details of the evidence for this in a document of this classification level. I have submitted a separately classified technical annex. I ask only that someone with the authority to stop this reads it before making any further decisions. I am not overcautious. I am not an embarrassment. I am the person in this dominion who has spent his career understanding humans, and I am telling you, clearly and without any uncertainty, that what is approaching is not a fleet action. It is not a territorial dispute. It is not a negotiation conducted from a position of military pressure. What is approaching is a reckoning. Humanity does not begin things like this. They are patient. They are slow. They tolerate more than almost any civilization I have studied. But they have a line, and we did not just cross it, we erased it, and what is on the other side of that line is something that has been waiting for 30 years to be used and has never been tested and will never need to be tested twice. I am submitting this report because it is my duty to submit it. I do not expect it to change anything. The Council will do what councils do. And the humans will do what humans have been quietly preparing to do for 30 years. I hope someone reads this. I hope they read it and act on it and that my fears turn out to be overcautious and that history records me as the analyst who panicked unnecessarily. But I do not think history will record it that way. I think history will record it the way it actually happened. And I am very afraid of the way it actually happened. Day 71. That is the number I say to myself when I try to explain later how fast it all moved. 71 days from the Lazarus transmission to the day Armada Lazarus departed. I am Commander Yusuf Adebayo and I am still not sure I have the right words for what I saw. Standing on the bridge of the unconquered sun on day 70, looking out at what had assembled in the staging system designated November 7, I thought about a word that humans use when something is so large and so complete that no comparison does it justice. The word is overwhelming. I have used it before. I used it loosely, the way people do, applying it to things that were impressive or unexpected or moving. I had not known what the word actually meant until that moment. There were 3,000 ships. I had never seen 3,000 ships. Nobody alive had. Even the archived records from the worst conflicts of Earth's own history, in the centuries before spaceflight, showed nothing that looked like this. Carriers as long as small cities. Destroyers in formation so precisely aligned that they looked like they had been placed there by a single hand. Supply ships, medical ships, communication vessels, all organized into a structure so clean and systematic that it felt less like a military fleet and more like a mechanism. Like something that had been built to do exactly one specific thing and had been waiting a long time for the moment to do it. And at the center of the formation, the 12 vessels that had shown up on long-range sensors 3 weeks earlier. Nobody on my crew had a clearance level high enough to be officially told what they were called. But Navy personnel talk, and by day 40 I knew the unofficial name that was moving through the fleet in quiet conversations and late-night discussions. The Solex Array. 12 ships, each one roughly twice the mass of a standard carrier, arranged in a specific geometric pattern that I did not recognize from any tactical doctrine I had ever studied. Their hulls were a different color from the rest of the fleet. Not a military gray or a tactical black, but a deep, unreadable dark, as if their surfaces had been designed to absorb rather than reflect. I learned only the basics of what they could do. That was enough. I want to be clear about something before I describe what happened in the Gorith system. The decision that was made by the Solis Compact Command Structure, approved by the full United Earth Council in a vote that was not unanimous, was not made lightly. I know there are people who believe it was made from anger. I understand why they believe that. I do not think they are right. The people who made this decision were not operating from anger. Anger is fast and hot and blind. What I observed in the command structure during those 71 days was something else entirely. It was cold and thorough and very deliberate. It was the decision-making of people who understood exactly what they were choosing and had weighed every alternative and had arrived at a conclusion that they did not celebrate and did not enjoy. The target was not Vekith Prime, the Vakari home world. The decision to exclude the home world was explicit and documented. The target was the Gorith system, 5 star systems away from Kepler's reach in the direction of the Vakari core territory. Gorith contained 5 inhabited worlds. It was the industrial and military heart of the Vakari dominion. The shipyards at Gorith had built the vessels that destroyed Kepler's reach. The weapons factories at Gorith had manufactured what had been fired into the colony's surface. The command infrastructure that had ordered and coordinated the action at Kepler's reach was based in the Gorith system. The choice of Gorith over Vekith Prime was a message inside a message. It said, "We know where your home is. We are choosing not to go there. We are going somewhere else. We are making sure you understand the difference." The fleet entered transit on day 71. I will not describe the transit in detail. Transit is transit. 17 hours in a state that is not quite consciousness, the ship folded around itself in dimensions that human physics can describe mathematically but that human minds cannot fully picture. Then the unfold. Then the moment of reorientation as the system around you rebuilds itself in real space and your senses catch up with your instruments. The Gorith star was yellow-white. Larger than Earth's sun, slightly, with the particular quality of light that makes objects in its system look slightly overexposed, colors too saturated, shadows too sharp. 5 worlds visible on the long-range display, the innermost 2 showing the energy signatures of heavy industrial activity, the middle 2 residential and administrative, the outermost largely military installations and deep space docking structures. The Vakari saw us coming. Of course they did. 3,000 ships do not arrive quietly. Every long-range sensor in the Gorith system would have registered the transit emergence signature before we had even finished orienting ourselves. And within minutes of our arrival, the Vakari response began. Military vessels came out of the docking structures on the 2 outermost worlds. Communication signals flooded every channel, some of them addressed to the Armada directly, some clearly internal Vakari traffic. On the diplomatic channel, a voice identifying itself as Gorith System Defense Command began transmitting a warning that the Armada was in violation of Vakari territorial space and demanding immediate withdrawal. Yusuf did not respond to the warning. He watched his displays. The 12 Solex vessels moved forward from the center of the formation. Smoothly, without hurry, like something very large and very certain of itself. They maintained their geometric arrangement. The rest of the Armada adjusted position around them without being given specific orders to do so, as if every commander in the fleet understood instinctively that the 12 ships needed space and that the Armada's job at this moment was to provide it. The Vakari military ships coming out of the docking structures were numerous. Our count reached over 1,000 before I stopped counting. They formed a defensive line between the Armada and the inner worlds, the inhabited worlds, and I watched them take their positions, and I thought about what was about to happen, and I pressed my hands flat against the console in front of me because I needed something solid to hold on to. And then the Solex array activated. I do not know how to describe what I saw. I have tried many times, in many conversations, and the words are always wrong. The closest I have come is this: it looked like the star changed its mind. The Gorith star's corona shifted. Not dramatically at first. Not in a way that looked wrong. It looked almost natural, like a solar flare building on a particularly active day. But the geometry of it was wrong. Solar flares have a randomness to them, a turbulence that reflects the chaotic nature of stellar physics. What I was watching did not have that randomness. What I was watching was directed. It was a vast physical process being given an orientation that physics alone would not have given it. The Gorith star was being turned toward its own system. The Vakari military ship stopped moving. On the communication channels, the warning transmissions from Gorith Defense Command stopped. There was a period of perhaps 40 seconds of complete silence on every channel. Then the internal Vakari traffic resumed, and I could not understand the language, but I did not need to understand it. I could hear what was in those voices. I could hear the shift from authority to urgency to something that had no military word for it. Then something extraordinary happened. Civilian ships began launching from the inhabited worlds. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Passenger transports, cargo freighters, personal vessels, anything that could carry people and achieve orbit and make a transit point. They rose from the surfaces of the Gorith worlds in streams, like water rising upward, and they oriented themselves toward the edge of the system, and they began to move. They were running. And the Armada let them run. This was not something I had been told to expect. I had not been briefed on this element of the operation. But the order came from Armada Command simultaneously, to every vessel, and it was clear and unambiguous. All civilian vessels attempting to evacuate the Gorith system were to be given free passage. Any civilian vessel that passed through the Armada's perimeter was not to be engaged. This applied to all vessels showing no military configuration regardless of their registry or origin. Every Vakari military vessel that attempted to leave with them was stopped. But the people got out. I watched the evacuation for 3 hours. The Solex process was slow by the standards of weapons deployment. It did not need to be fast. The Gorith star was already compromised. The plasma currents that the array had redirected were self-sustaining now. The star's own physics were doing the work that the array had started. It was like watching someone move the first stone in an avalanche. The stone moves slowly at first, and then the mountain moves. The Vakari military ships between the Armada and the inner worlds held their positions until very late in the process. I do not know what orders they were given or what they were waiting for. I do not know if they were waiting for a counterorder that never came or for a weapon that could answer this situation and did not exist. They held their positions for a long time in a system that was no longer a system they could defend, and then they began to withdraw, and the Armada let them withdraw the same way it had let the civilian ships go. We had not come to destroy a fleet. The Gorith star reached the point of no return 14 hours after the Solex array activated. I was not watching the star by then. I was watching the evacuation numbers on my display, watching the count of civilian ships that had cleared the Armada's perimeter. By hour 14, it was in the hundreds of thousands. People in ships that were too small, too crowded, not properly provisioned for long transit. People who had left with whatever they could carry in the time they had. People who would arrive somewhere uncertain and find themselves starting over. I thought about Kepler's reach. I thought about starting over being something they got to do. The Gorith star's emissions became visible to the naked eye at hour 16. Not from its normal position in the system but from angles that stars do not emit light. The surface activity was unlike anything in the natural record. The colors were wrong. The shapes were wrong. It was beautiful in a way that felt terrible to observe, a vast light show produced by the end of 5 inhabited worlds and the death of a star system. I turned away from the viewport at hour 17. Derek was at his station. He was not crying this time. He was looking at his displays with an expression that I did not have a name for, something that was not satisfaction and was not grief and was not pride and was not shame, but contained elements of all of them. Gwen had her hands in her lap. The bridge was quiet. The final sensor sweep of the Gorith system was completed at hour 22. It confirmed what every display had been showing for the previous 6 hours. The 5 inhabited worlds of the Gorith system had been rendered uninhabitable by stellar event. The shipyards, the weapons facilities, the military installations, the command infrastructure that had ordered Kepler's reach, everything that had been the industrial and military core of the Vakari dominion was gone. Not occupied. Not seized. Not repurposed. Gone. Yusuf made a recording at hour 23, speaking into the ship's log in a voice that was very quiet and very level. I was on the bridge when he made it. He said, Armada Lazarus has completed its designated operation in the Gorith system. Vakari civilian evacuation is confirmed. Armada is withdrawing to staging area November 7. We are not what they made us. But we made sure they would never forget what we can become. Then he closed the log. Then he sat in the command chair for a while without saying anything. Nobody said anything. We were all sitting in the same silence, the silence of people who had just seen the largest thing they would ever see in their lives and were trying to decide how to carry it. The Armada withdrew. The Gorith system burned behind us. And the stars ahead of us looked exactly the same as they always had. 27 years is a long time to carry something. I have been asked, in the years since the Armada returned, whether the weight of it ever gets lighter. Journalists ask me this. Researchers ask me. Other Kepler's Reach survivors ask me, usually in the particular quiet tone that people use when they are really asking about themselves. They want to know if it gets easier. They want to know if there is a future in which what happened stops being the loudest thing in the room. I am Nina Solis. I was 7 years old when Kepler's Reach was destroyed. I am 34 years old now, and I am recording this for the United Earth Memorial Archive, and I want to answer that question honestly before I answer anything else. It does not get lighter. But it changes shape. And the change is not a small thing. I grew up as one of the Kepler kids. That is what people called us, the children who had been off colony when the Vakari came and who came back to a universe that had a hole in it where our home used to be. There were 63 of us. 63 children under the age of 14 who had been on transit stations or visiting relatives on other worlds or in medical care facilities when the colony was destroyed. 63 children who did not die when everyone they knew died. I used to think about that number a lot. 63. I used to wonder why we had been the ones who were somewhere else that day. I used to feel the guilt of it the way you feel a cold wind, coming from no specific direction, always present. I do not feel it that way anymore. It took a long time to get there. My mother's name was Mara. She was a schoolteacher on Kepler's Reach for 11 years. She recorded a log in the early morning hours after the colony went dark, sitting in the cabin of Transit Station 4, while I was asleep in the next room. The recording is part of the official memorial archive. Anyone with access to the archive can listen to it. Thousands of people have. It has been described by historians as one of the most important personal documents from the Kepler's Reach incident, because of its clarity and its humanity and because of what it captures of a specific life in a specific place that no longer exists. My mother described the colony with love. She described the copper-colored wheat fields and the Saturday market and the little theater that seated 300 people. She described her neighbor Leon, who played guitar badly every evening, and how the sound had become part of the air itself. She described Claire, a woman she had never met, whose 9-second distress fragment she had heard in the early morning dark and whose name she whispered alone in her cabin because she felt someone had to. The recording is 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. It ends mid-sentence. She had been recording continuously and was still recording when something interrupted her, some noise or movement from my room, and the recording simply stops. It stops at the word and she had been saying so. She was building to something, and the something never came, and the recording stops. I have listened to that recording more times than I can count. I listened to it when I was 8 and 10 and 12 and 15 and 20 and 27. I have listened to it in the middle of the night in the dark of whatever room I was sleeping in. I have listened to it sitting in the sun on good days and in the rain on bad ones. I have tried to complete the sentence in my head. I have tried hundreds of times to hear the word that was about to follow, so I have never been able to do it in a way that does not break something in me. So is the last word my mother ever said in any recording. It is not a complete thought. It is the beginning of one, a sentence turning toward something, an intention that was never finished. And I have learned, over 27 years, that some things do not finish. Some sentences just stop. And you carry the unfinished part with you for as long as you live, and you build your life around it, not to complete it, because that is not something you can do, but to honor it. To move in the direction it was pointing toward even though you cannot know for certain where it was going. I want to tell you about the memorial. The Kepler's Reach Memorial was constructed 11 years after the incident. It was placed in a fixed orbit in the debris field where the colony had been, which was designated a permanent protected zone by the United Earth Council and the Galactic Assembly both. The memorial itself is not large. It is not an imposing structure. It is a ring, perhaps 40 meters in diameter, made of material salvaged from the colony's orbital fragments, the broken pieces of the world that had been. In the center of the ring, suspended on a web of nearly invisible cable, is a single light source. It burns continuously. It is visible from the outer edge of the Kepler system to any ship with adequate optics. I visited it for the first time when I was 19. I went alone. I did not tell any of the other Kepler kids I was going because I did not want to share it yet. I borrowed passage on a survey vessel that was doing a routine pass through the sector, and I arranged to be dropped at the memorial site in a small transit pod, and I spent 6 hours there alone. The debris field is quieter than I expected. Space is always quiet, of course, but there is a quality to the quiet at Kepler's Reach that is different from other places. It is the quiet of somewhere that used to be loud. Used to be full of voices and footsteps and music and the everyday sounds of people going about their lives. The debris moves slowly. The pieces of what was have not dispersed over the years as much as scientists initially predicted. They stay in the general area of the original colony's orbit, as if pulled together by something that is not quite gravity. I floated in the pod and looked at the memorial light and thought about Leon's guitar. I thought about the Saturday market. I thought about a theater that seated 300 people. I thought about all the specific small details my mother had recorded in her 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the details that historians and researchers value for what they reveal about life on the colony, but that I value for a different reason entirely. I value them because they are the last words I have from my mother. I value them because in those 4 minutes and 12 seconds, she was not thinking about history. She was not thinking about what future people would make of her words. She was just talking about the place she loved and the people she knew. She was just talking to someone. Maybe to me. Maybe to whoever was listening. The Vakari Dominion was transformed by what happened. This is not a simple story. The transformation was painful and contested and ongoing, and I do not want to make it sound like something clean because it was not. The High Council was dissolved 14 months after the Gorith system event, after the evacuation refugees and the remaining Vakari civilian population revolted against the leadership that had made the decision at Kepler's Reach. The Deputy Expansion Secretary whose name had appeared on the diplomatic drone's message was placed on trial in a court that included both Vakari and human judges. I did not attend the trial. I was not invited and I did not seek to be. I did not need to see it. I already knew that whatever happened in that courtroom would not give me back my mother's unfinished sentence. What I know is that out of the Gorith evacuation, there were millions of Vakari refugees. Millions of people who had been on those 5 worlds and who had run in whatever ships they could find and who had emerged on the other side of the Armada's perimeter into a universe that had changed as fundamentally for them as it had for me 27 years ago. They had lost their home. They knew, now, what that felt like. I have worked with Vakari refugee integration programs for 6 years. I did not decide to do this quickly or easily. It took me years of thinking and many conversations with people I trusted and at least one very long night sitting alone in my apartment looking at the ceiling before I understood what I actually wanted to do with the fact of my own survival. I decided that surviving was not enough. I decided that what my mother had whispered Claire's name for, a woman she had never met, was a belief in the specific individual person. Not in populations or politics or civilizations or strategic calculations, but in the individual person who was afraid and alone and whose name deserved to be said by someone even if that someone had never met them. I work with individual people. I sit with Vakari refugees in the intake centers and I listen to them describe what they lost. I hear about their homes and their families and the specific small details of lives that were ordinary and unremarkable and irreplaceable. I hear about the things they had to leave behind. I hear about the children who do not understand what happened and who ask when they're going home. I tell them I understand. They know I do. A year into this work, I met a Vakari girl named Sitha. She was 9 years old. She had been born in the Gorith system, on the second world, and she had been evacuated on a civilian transport with her grandmother because her parents had not made it to the launch point in time. She did not know what had happened to her parents. She might never know. She asked me, through the translator, whether I hated Vakari people. I thought about the question for a moment. I thought about how to answer it honestly and carefully and in a way that a 9-year-old child could understand. I told her that I had lost my home when I was 7 years old. I told her I had lost my mother. I told her that the people who made that decision were gone now and that the decision itself was something that would never stop hurting me, but that she was not that decision. I told her that hating her for what had been done before she was old enough to walk would not bring back my mother or the colony or the 140,000 people who had been there. I told her what I actually believed, which is that the thing you feel when something terrible is done to you is real and it is yours and you have every right to it. But it is not the same thing as a lifetime of choices about how to treat the people who come after. She looked at me for a while. Then she said, in the careful English she was learning, that her grandmother had told her the same thing about the humans. We did not solve anything in that conversation. She was 9 and I was 31 and neither of us had the power to undo what had been done to either of us. But we sat together for a while after that without talking, which is sometimes the most honest thing two people can do. The Galactic Assembly added a permanent human seat 22 months after the Gorith event. No vote was required. The amendment was proposed by a coalition of 12 civilizations that had been observing developments in the Vakari sector and had drawn their own conclusions. The seat was presented to United Earth's representative without ceremony, the way you present something to someone when you understand that they do not need the formality. We had not asked for the seat. We had not wanted the seat. But we were there now in a different way than we had been before, and everyone in that assembly understood why, and nobody pretended otherwise. I have been asked many times, by historians and journalists and by ordinary people who want to understand, what I think humanity became after Kepler's reach. I have been asked whether we became something harder. Whether the show of force in the Gorith system changed what we were at the core. I do not think it changed what we were. I think it showed what we had always been, the full version, the version that includes both the schoolteacher who whispers a stranger's name in the dark and the military commander who looks at a debris field and says no, it has not. I think those two things have always lived in the same place in us, and the universe got to see both of them at the same time, and the seeing changed how the universe talked to us afterward. I am not proud of what happened in the Gorith system. I am not ashamed of it either. Pride and shame are both too simple for what it was. What I feel, when I think about it carefully, is something closer to sorrow. Sorrow for what was lost on all sides. Sorrow for the gap between what people could have been to each other and what they chose instead. My mother ended her recording mid-sentence. She was trying to say something about Kepler's reach, about the place she loved. She was trying to finish a thought that started with the copper wheat and the Saturday market and Leon's guitar and the theater that seated 300 people and the two moons rising together in the evening sky. She never got to finish it. But I have spent 27 years moving in the direction she was pointing. I have spent 27 years trying to understand what she was trying to say, and I think I understand it now in a way I did not when I was 7, or 19, or even 30. I think she was trying to say that this was worth protecting. That the ordinary things, the neighbors and the markets and the badly played music and the children in their terrible plays and the people buying bread on a Saturday morning, that those things were the point. Not the territory. Not the expansion designation or the strategic position or the resource value. The people. The ordinary, unremarkable, absolutely irreplaceable people. I think that is what she was going to say. So this was worth something. So this mattered. So we were here. I visit the memorial every year now. I go alone, still. I sit in the pod and I look at the light and I talk to the people whose names I know and the people whose names I will never know, and Claire, who I know only by her voice in 9 seconds of static, who said she loved her family and whose name my mother whispered in the dark so someone would say it. I say it too. I say all of their names that I know, and I hold silence for the ones I do not, and then I watch the 2 moons of Kepler's reach rise over the debris field. They still rise. The moons were not touched. They orbit the same path they always have, rising and setting in a rhythm that does not know and does not care that what they used to rise over is gone. They are still beautiful. My mother would have wanted me to say that. They are still beautiful, and I see them, and I remember, and I go home.